Development. Basic questions we're going to be looking at in this lecture. What is developmental psychology? What is the nature-nurture question? What does it mean to say that nature and nurture interact to affect development? And then finally, what is attachment? And what are the attachment styles? All right, so I'm going to read you the riddle of the Sphinx. Here we go. Oedipus came to the gates of Thebes. Guarding the gates was a Sphinx, a terrible monster with the body of a lion and the head and torso of a woman. She allowed no one to enter or leave the city without answering the riddle that she posed. If the traveler could not answer correctly, she would kill and devour him. As no one had yet come up with the right answer, the Sphinx was well fed, and the city of Thebes was effectively cut off from all trade and all contact with the world outside the city walls. When Oedipus reached the gates of the city, the creature posed her riddle. So here's the riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? So that's the riddle of the Sphinx. Some of you may be familiar with this riddle and know the answer. Others of you may not. The answer to the riddle is man, or more generally, humans. This is a metaphor, basically, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, 3 legs in the evening, for the passage through our development, right? So we start out in the morning of our lives, crawling around. We're little creepy crawlers crawling around, and then we mature, and then we are able to walk around on 2 legs at noon. So and then later in life, we experience the physical and cognitive decline that's inevitable, and then that 3rd leg is the cane for the older person who's experiencing this physical decline. All right, so that's the riddle of the Sphinx. The real riddle is, how do we go from being little multicellular creatures in our mother's bellies, wombs, to being college students and adults capable of responsibilities and doing great things and everything else? How does that happen? So really what the developmentalist is interested in is how we both change and in some ways how we stay the same over the course of the lifespan, which covers a lot of ground. So developmental psychology is one of the big areas in psychology. It's one of the earliest that was formed as a distinct area within the discipline of psychology, and it's really grown to be pretty vast. So continuity and change. So let's look at what we mean by continuity and change. So change takes 2 forms. We can think of as ourselves changing in quantitative and qualitative ways. So quantitatively, we've gotten taller and grown bigger and that sort of thing. We weigh more now than we did when we were newborns. And then qualitative changes are those changes that don't really come in amounts, or not really measurable in amounts, but rather, for example, our sense of identity. Myself, I'm 53. The way I answer the question, who am I today, is quite different from the way I answered that same question when I was 18 years old or 23. So our sense of selves change over the course of time. So we change in both ways, in amounts and then also in qualities. Continuity, some basic parts of us stay the same. For example, personality type. So if you're, and we'll look at this in a little bit later in this lecture, when we're born with a temperament that is our characteristic way of responding to the environment. And if you're born a grouchy little baby, you'll probably be a grouchy young person. You'll probably be a grouchy older person. So temperament is one of these personality attributes that seems to be inherited. And so that's probably not going to change a whole lot over the course of the lifespan. So change and continuity over the course of the lifespan, the entire lifespan from prenatally to basically contemplating death at the end of our lives, is fair game for the developmental psychologist. So something to consider about your own development. What ways have you changed over the years? qualitatively and quantitatively? And what, if anything, has stayed the same or changed very little for you? Can you remember back when you were small? Are there pieces of you that you've retained now that you're an adult? All right, so here's the big question, really. What's the big riddle? Um, is there some natural order pattern that underlies human development? So if you remember back in chapter 2 where we talked about the fundamental assumptions of the scientific approach, and that the assumption was that there was some natural order underpinning things, and really it's up to the scientist, typically the experimentalist, to sort of determine what those natural laws are, that order that underpins human behavior and human development. So that's really the big question. And there's commonalities that we could see across individuals and even individuals across culturally. These common emergent phenomenon that suggest that there's some natural order underlying human development. And so it's really that's the riddle. So to what extent is there some natural order underpinning things, or how much variability there is in individuals' development based on their experience in the world? All right, so what this leads us into is this nature nurture question. I think we've talked about this a little bit, and it's really not a question that's being posed in the way it was historically. But let's consider it, because that's really what we're getting at here with respect to development. To what extent is our maturation as a human being driven by genetics, or to what extent is our development being driven by environmental inputs, right? So on the nature side, you'll see Arnold Giselle. I don't think he's mentioned in our text. In fact, in most developmental sections, in most intro psych texts, you don't see Giselle mentioned. But if you are interested in this stuff and you want to take a developmental psychology class, you can take an entire class in this area, and you will learn much about Giselle. So he was the sort of the pioneer in this area of psychology. He came down on the side of genetic nature producing maturation. That is, people would emerge, grow and develop and so forth, predominantly through the sort of the unfolding of one's genotype. And then there was John Watson, kind of on the opposite side, the nurture side, saying that really the action is in the environment, that maturation and development, we become who we are, largely through environmental inputs, not heredity. So I want to remind you of this famous quote by Watson. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed, in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select: doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, and yes, even beggar, man, and thief, regardless of his talents, pensions, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. But, and this is the part that you don't really usually see in an intro psych text. I've included in this quote: I am going beyond my facts, and I admit it, but so have the advocates to the contrary, and they have been doing it for many thousands of years. So in this quote, Watson is saying it's environment. That's really what shapes us predominantly. Certainly people have stuff in them that guides their development, but biology is not destiny, really. Give me any kid, regardless of their background, and I can shape them into being whomever they aspire to be. So really, environment and learning was where the action was. So this latter part, going beyond my facts, well, when a scientist says he or she is going beyond his facts, his or her facts, what they're saying is that they haven't really done the science yet, but they're going to make the bold statement anyway. And he's saying that from the behavioral view, really, I'm so confident in the behaviorist view that learning is really what shapes us into who we are, and our experience in the world shapes us into who we are, that he's quite willing to make this bold statement. And then he's also saying that the people on the other side, that is the advocates to the contrary, the geneticists, the hereditarian folks, and there was this debate back there in the early 1900s, this real debate between the hereditarian folks that were saying biology is really destiny, and the behaviorists that were saying no, biology is not destiny. Rather, we can shape individuals into to becoming anything that they aspire to be, or individuals as an act of will and by having certain experiences can do so themselves. Um, the hereditarian folks were saying people are kind of locked into whatever their genetic material has predestined them to be. And often this was tied up into ideology, personal ideology, political ideology, and that sort of thing. And race entered into the conversation, and there was certainly this debate looking at race differences and various traits and attributes and that sort of thing. So it was very controversial, the nature nurture question. These days, however, uh, it's not so controversial. That is, this nature nurture question isn't really being posed in the way it was before, and there's people that have their beliefs and that sort of thing. And what you're getting here is a sort of positions by Giselle and Watson that have no nuance. I'm certain that there are all kinds of different nuances to their positions, but this is kind of what you get in introductory class. This guy was on this side, that guy was on that side, so you don't get the nuance. But anyway, I just wanted to pose the nature nurture debate using these two characters from the history of psychology. So something to consider from time to time is as you look at yourself now, and maybe you project out into your future, how much of who you are and who you will be, quite possibly, is attributable to your genotype. How much to your nurture, that is, how much of your the traits and attributes and aspirations and that sort of thing, your potentialities, how much is that attributable to the experiences that you've had or that you can have as you move forward, right? So that's the important thing. You look into your future and you look at yourself and you think, what's possible for me, given my genetics and given the experiences that I can quite possibly have moving forward. All right, so nature nurture question. This debate is kind of artificially framed in that it's one or the other, but rather the received view these days is that now it's not one or the other, it's basically both. So we now perceive nature and nurture as being inseparable and interactive. That is, they play off of each other, and both working together, interacting together, affect development. So we're going to look at that, a concrete example of that, because it's a little bit abstract. So let's put some meat on those bones. What does it mean to say that nature and nurture interact to affect development? So let's start with temperament. So I mentioned temperament before, and temperament largely is your characteristic style of reacting to environmental stimuli. So attentiveness, activity level, irritability, that sort of thing. So the personality folks believe, and also this has been fleshed out in research on behavioral genetics, that this temperament or the style of reacting to the environment and its stimuli is inborn. That is, you come into the world possessing a particular temperament. So babies we can qualify as having different temperamental styles. So you have easy babies that are predictable. They react in situations cheerfully. They'll seldom fuss. Then you have the slow to warm up types, react warily to people and situations. Then you have the difficult babies, irregular and irritable. So we have three different temperamental styles here. Myself, I was an easy baby as far as I know, but people fall into different categories and with respect to temperament, and this will stay with you over the course of your lifespan, evidently. All right, so a kid comes into the world having a particular way of reacting to the environment and everything in it. All right, so that's the nature side. Right, on the nurture side, we have the caregiver. Usually it's mom, the primary caregiver. And so the nurture side, that's what's being received from the environment. So a baby with a particular temperament will land in an environment that has its own characteristics. So that environment will present itself differently to each child. So the environment will vary, or that nurture side will vary with the caregiver's own temperament and other traits. So that caregiver has their own attributes, strengths, limitations, and that sort of thing. So it'll vary with the available resources caregivers have to draw upon for parenting. So these are just examples of how nurture can bump up against nature. The characteristics and the environment and the resources and so forth of the caregivers will interplay with a baby's temperament. So let's consider what this interaction impacts. So, and these are just a couple of possibilities, but they're large. They loom large in our development. So this interaction of nature and nurture, baby's temperament and mom's temperament and resources and so forth can impact the child's sense of what kind of place the world is. So if you have um, a child that's born into the world having a sort of a difficult temperament, and that child also lands in an environment where the mother maybe also have a difficult temperament herself, and combined with maybe limited social support, that is, she has difficulty accessing um, uh, tangible resources. Maybe she has difficulty paying the rent. Maybe she has difficulty buying appropriate food or enough food. Maybe she doesn't have any sort of extended network, any sort of emotional support. Maybe she's lacking in education. Maybe she doesn't know where to seek help, information, and so forth to help her be a better parent, or maybe when the child is in need. So imagine that kind of situation, what kind of the outcomes we can expect for a child born into that kind of situation with that kind of temperament. So as opposed to a baby with a very easy temperament being born to a mom with an easy temperament herself, who has sort of access to unlimited resources. It's going to impact what kind of place the child will eventually perceive the world to be. Is the world a cold and distant and unpredictable and random sort of place? Or is the world a kind of a warm and loving and welcoming and predictable sort of place where I get my needs met and I get most of what I want too? And then the quality of the emotional bond a child has with the caregiver will be affected. And this is quite important. We're going to spend the rest of the lecture actually talking about that emotional bond because it's so important. That is, this early attachment, that's what that emotional bond is referred to, is crucial for a child's early development. And it's predictive of all kinds of different important things as kids enter school and interact with other people. And then it's also important later on as they form attachments and emotional bonds with others, intimate others later in their adult life. So this interaction between a child's temperament, and this is just one small example of nature and nurture, temperament and the environment within which a baby with a particular temperament lands. By the way, a child really has no choice over the environment that they occupy for a good portion of their early life. It's really up to the caregivers to shape that. All right, so let's look at this attachment, this emotional bond. We looked at a little bit this nature and nurture interacting and what sort of impacts it might have on a child's development. But now I kind of want to shift gears to look at this emotional connection, this attachment. If you want, you can pause this video and watch the video on Harry Harlow's monkeys. This is Harry Harlow, who did experiments with monkeys, looking at sort of what will happen when you give a monkey a choice between sort of what we would consider sort of a cold detached, emotionally detached mother, but a mother that provides nurturance, and a mother that provides a sort of warmth and creature comfort, but doesn't provide nurturance. So this is what Harlow's experiments with these primates was set up to determine or to discover, and really the outcomes of these studies surprised them. So take a minute and watch that, and then come back. It's under the supplemental websites. All right, so presumably you watched that video, and really the extent of um, the uh, the the monkey's behavior towards the cloth mother was really pretty astonishing. I mean, if you start out, you think it's going to be 50-50. The animal will spend about, half the time on one on the wire mother, half the time on the cloth mother, but they spent the predominance of their time on the cloth mother, and you saw when the monkeys were frightened that they went to the cloth mother, and then it changed their disposition towards that scary clanking metal monkey. That is, once they went to that secure base, they were empowered by that, and they even showed signs of aggression towards it. So having that, this is just one example in non-human primates, having that secure base upon which to proceed from is massively important. It can change as a child develops. If they have that secure base, it changes their whole perspective about the world. That this world, certainly there's scary things in the world, but that if I have that secure base, I can go out and I can counter those scary things. I feel more comfortable exploring and that sort of thing. So this has been actually fleshed out with the research on people too. You have that secure attachment, and it opens all kinds of doors and possibilities, creates all kinds of possibilities for kids as compared to those who don't have it. So in the human case, let's talk about babies. Babies don't really show a preference for their moms or their primary caregivers. But later on, it begins to show up. So somewhere around 6 to 8 months, kids begin to show this separation anxiety. They show that preference for their moms or their primary caregiver, and this peaks around 14 to 18 months. And so at that point, hopefully the kid has a nice secure base, and they can go out and begin sort of exploring more and leaving mom more and more, and feeling comfortable doing so. So ideally during this time, that strong emotional bond is formed between infants and their caregivers. So we call that bond attachment. So having that secure attachment is really pretty critical. So in the science that has been done on this and looked at the relation between different qualities of attachment, that is the qualities of that emotional bond, and different outcomes for kids later on in life, has been very important. But how do you measure that attachment? It's not like you can ask a 14-month-old child, hey, how's it going between you and mom? You guys pretty good together? Do you feel positively towards your mother? That sort of thing. It doesn't really work that way. So you got to be clever in the way that you measure attachment. So I want to introduce the strange situation procedure. And this has been a pretty standard way to measure the quality of the affectional bond that exists between a caregiver and an infant when they're pre-verbal and can't articulate the nature of the relationship. So this was developed by Mary Ainsworth, and it's used to identify 3 attachment styles. So by running a child and their parent, their caregiver, through the strange situation procedure, you can identify a baby as being securely attached, avoidant, anxious, ambivalent. So take a minute and watch the video on the strange situation, and that shows you an example of a child and their mother being put through that procedure. So take a second and watch that, please, and then we'll come back. All right, so presuming you watched that, the baby that you saw in the video is probably qualifiable as being securely attached. And really what you're looking at is what happens at the reunion. So when mom leaves and when she comes back, what does the baby do? So based on watching those, and they run that procedure a number of times until they have enough data. to qualify the baby as being securely attached, avoidant, or anxious ambivalent. So um, these numbers that you see attached to these different styles of attachment are estimates with respect to the number of kids falling into those categories in the U.S. So you can see that the predominant number, the most babies fall into that securely attached. So that is, they're actively seeking proximity and contact and reunion. They explore them while mom is around, see her as a secure base, often distressed during separation, but calm down quickly at reunion. Then the avoidance, often don't cry much at separation, do not seek proximity and actively avoid the mother at reunion, do not resist contact if mom initiates it, do not cry much at reunion. Then the anxious, ambivalent, or resistant, very upset and distressed during separation, actively seek proximity and contact at reunion, but resist contact at reunion, often starting here. So that's the ambivalence, which is mixed feelings essentially. They continue crying at reunion, do not calm. So you see pretty clear differences in the way kids react to that separation and reunion. And then based on the observations of the videos, then you can qualify a child as falling into one of those categories. All right. So the implications of this, certainly secure attachment is ideal in research that has followed kids out into their preschool and grade school years and so forth, show that secure attachment is predictive of kids persevering at tasks longer. That is, they don't give up. They have higher self-esteem. They're more comfortable exploring. They're more curious, self-reliant, better peer relationships. So there's all kinds of positive stuff attached to that secure attachment. So the idea is that that early emotional bond is formed. Ideally, it would be a secure attachment because it's predictive of all these kind of positive things. All right, concept check here. Separation anxiety shows up around blank months, peaks around blank months. What's the answer? So it shows up around 6 to 8, peaks around 14 to 18 months. All right. So I chose to focus on attachment. Well, actually, let's do this. Mercedes takes her 1-year-old son Justice to visit a daycare center where she plans to enroll him. Justice eagerly explores the playroom as long as Mercedes is present. When his mom leaves the room to fill out some forms, Justice becomes somewhat upset. But when Mercedes returns, he quickly calms down. This is the type of interaction you might observe between a child and a parent who share a secure relationship, attachment relationship, have not developed an attachment relationship. Share an anxious ambivalent attachment, share an avoidant attachment. I would say it's probably A. All right, so what I was going to say a little bit earlier is that I chose to focus on attachment. Out of all the things I could have picked out of this chapter, I mean, there's all kinds of different stuff. I chose this because, I hope that hopefully that you remember this, later on after you've taken this class and you remember some of it and you forget most of it, probably. This is something that you remember. It's very important. So the implications of attachment, that early affectional bond, is very important for kids in their development as preschoolers, as grade schoolers, and so forth. It's also important for us as adults. Specifically, there's continuity of childhood attachment style in adult romantic relationships. So there's studies that have looked at attachment styles early on and seen how they predict how adults form intimacy, intimate relationships later on. We'll look at some of that research in a second. But essentially, what kids are learning early on as they develop closeness with another human being is they're developing a set of expectations or mental models about what it means to be in closeness with another human being. Now, this is very important. If I am a difficult baby born to a difficult mother in difficult circumstances, then our attachment may be let's say, anxious ambivalent or avoidant or something like that, because I have a mental model of the world and the people that populate it that tells me what I can expect about people in the world. People are going to be cold and distant and unpredictable. The world is going to be this cold, distant, unpredictable place. Whereas another child that's secure and has warmth and security and that sort of thing is going to have a different set of expectations about what it means to be in closeness with another human being. So we carry that into our adult relationships, and it creates possibilities for us. That early emotional bind creates possibilities for us that will carry into our adult life, and it'll affect our possibilities for intimacy later on in life. So measuring adult attachment style, um, for example, Hazen and Shaver did a study looking at adult attachment and how it related to intimate relationships as an adult. So one of the ways you can measure that adult attachment style is just having people read these scenarios, right? Secure, avoidant, and anxious, ambivalent, and then based on your own experience to qualify yourself as falling into one or the other of those categories. So, for example, a secure attachment, I find it relatively easy to get close to others. I'm comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. I don't often worry about being abandoned or about somebody getting too close to me. So if I qualify myself as falling into that category, then I see myself as sort of having a secure attachment. And then you have the other two. So this is what researchers have done, one measure of adult attachment. So Hazen and Shaver, for example, had their adult participants qualify themselves as being secure, avoidant, anxious, ambivalent, and then they looked at other aspects of these adults' relationships in their lives. So what they found was that adults with different attachment styles differ predictably in the way they experience romantic love. So kind of predictably, secure adults or adults qualifying themselves as secure had happier, longer lasting relationships. The avoidant folks reported more often a fear of intimacy, and then the anxious ambivalent reported relationships characterized by obsession, desire for reciprocation and union, extreme emotional highs and lows, extreme sexual attraction and jealousy. So turbulence. And then a finding of that study that I find pretty interesting is that the best predictor of adult attachment style, that is, what predicted best whether an adult would qualify themselves as secure, avoidant, or anxious ambivalent, was the relationship with the parents and parents' marital relationships. So that secure adults, that is, those research participants that qualified themselves as securely attached, reported warmer relationships with and between parents. So this is actually a pretty profound finding. And it really reinforces the idea that we as parents really are modeling for our children what it means to be in closeness with another person, um, and that kids internalize that experience and then they carry it with them forward, and it shapes um, their possibilities for closeness um, as adults, for intimate relationships. So this is, I think, a really important message for us, both with respect to the formation of strong, emotional, secure attachments with our kids, and also other behaviors that we model for our kids. So our kids are watching us all the time. If we want our child to be a particular way as they develop and mature, then we probably should be modeling that kind of outcome for our kids. All right, so here are the learning objectives. Please attend to these, because there's quiz and test questions coming directly from these.